morning, everybody. My name's Ben Jacobs, and I was the program coordinator for the module program in 1995 and 1998. And my background, I worked at Sequoia Kings Canyon the last 13 years as a fuels management specialist there. And I retired last Friday. Got too old, so I got kicked out. And so this is my first post-retirement gig, so I'm pretty happy to be there to share some of the history of the module program with you guys. Briefly, let's talk about how I became the module coordinator. Back in '94, I'd been pretty much at that time my whole career had been as a hotshot on various hotshot crews, most recently Arrowhead hotshots in Sequoia Kings Canyon. In '94, it was a busy season. My body's kind of starting to fall apart. My personal life was falling apart. Things like that. It was kind of time, I was thinking I kind of need to think about what I'm going to do with my life. I was even thinking about maybe leaving fire, that type of stuff. And talking to my old soup, some of you may know Jim Cook, was the superintendent, did a lot of training. He said, hey, you want to come up to Boise and do some training development for a couple of weeks in December of '94. And I've been talking, and we were hearing about this new program the Park Service was going to create. Cook was telling me, hey, they may need a coordinator, if you want to do something. Maybe ask about that. So I came up to work on, I think it was S330 for a couple of weeks in December of that year, '94. Talked to a fellow named Bill Clark. Some of you may know him. He was a Park Service at that time, went on to be the state FMO for Idaho. And they were putting together this module program. I said, yeah, I told him I didn't know what it was. I just said I was interested in maybe being a coordinator, because I heard you guys need someone to coordinate this program. Absolutely had no idea what I was even asking you to do. And so that 2 weeks came and went, and Cook brought me back up in January after a couple-week furlough to continue working on that training course. And so after that second 2 weeks, or towards the end, I asked, hey, Jim, do you know anything about this module coordinating job thing? And he goes, I don't know. So he sent out an email. Next thing I know, we're having a meeting this Friday. I'm getting ready to jump on a plane and we go home. We have this meeting, and Bill Clark says, yeah, you're it. You start Monday. Oh, hang on a second. So basically, I went to Boise for a 2-week detail and work on some training and stayed 3 years as a module coordinator. So it was kind of a cool thing to fall into. This was the Doris P&F in Sequoia Kings Canyon with the Whiskey Town module. Brenda, you may recognize yourself there. With Secretary Bruce Babbitt. So what they did, they stuck me in this. This was my first office in Boise. You can see they didn't know where to put me, so they moved out some printers and copy machines and stuck me in this little office there. And basically, what I kind of was, in some ways, sort of a paid lobbyist for the modules initially. And kind of going back, how many folks were in fire in 1995? So probably about a quarter to a third, maybe. 95 things were a lot different back then. We had P&Fs. You probably heard that term, prescribed natural fire, which is now fire use, which is now fire for resource benefit, or whatever they're calling it these days. And P&Fs in '95, they were considered to be a prescribed fire. Even though they were a wildfire started by lightning, they were considered by the fire world to be a prescribed fire. So you didn't get hazard pay. You go to a P&F, you didn't get hazard pay. Because it was a prescribed fire, the coordination centers, the GACs, generally would not support sending resources to them unless they were converted to wildfires. So it was a lot different time. And the NPS at that time had been thinking about, we need people to help manage these P&Fs. We need people to do prescribed burning. There have been some past attempts to create prescribed fire type resources, but guess what happens when fire season comes along? Everybody goes to wildfires because that's what people want to do. So in 1994, on the Howling Fire in Glacier National Park, I guess that was when it kind of came to a head. From what I remember, the Park Service had really a lot of difficulty getting resources, and it finally kind of tipped the scales. And the idea was Park Service felt they needed people available regardless of fire activity, regardless of preparedness levels, to be available to help manage these P&Fs. So they put their money where their mouth was in 1995, and they created the Prescribed Fire Support Crew, which is the precursor for what you all are now. This was, as far as I know, the first national resource solely dedicated to prescribed fire and prescribed natural fires at that time. Pretty revolutionary concept. The idea behind it was a 20-person crew that could be put together as 20 people to work on prescribed natural fires, and that's what they would be available throughout the fire season. Realizing that prescribed natural fires only come sporadically, they broke them into 4 or 5-person modules, and they spread them across the western U.S. And so the Prescribed Fire Support Crew's original locations were Whiskeytown, Yellowstone, Saguaro, and Bandelier. And I think the Whiskeytown module is the oldest surviving continuous module in this program. So they realized they needed someone to track this program, and that's where I came in. In my job, I was the crew coordinator, and I was stationed here at NISI in that little closet that I had a picture of. Among the things that I was responsible for, I was responsible for coordinating the modules, scheduling them to go to prescribed fires, determining which module would go to a P&F, basically moving them around like chess pieces is how I kind of remember it doing. And when the idea is I kind of looked at them as 20 individuals broken into these modules where we could combine, mix and match, whatever the order came in for, we just filled it. Hey, we need 10 people, we need 7 people. I would try as best as I could to figure out how we could match those needs with what people wanted. So the purpose, this is taken right out of the first operations guide, which actually I wrote in '95. And you can see the purpose of establishing the crew is to provide the NPS, it was an NPS resource, with skilled mobile personnel are solely dedicated to prescribed fire management. And it also goes on to state the crew is a national resource and will be available for use by all NPS units service-wide throughout the 1995 prescribed fire season. The primary use will be to assist with prescribed natural fires and management ignited prescribed fires in the areas of ignition, holding, monitoring, and fire behavior predictions. That was the original mission statement of the prescribed fire support crew. I said the primary priority was to be available for P&Fs, to be able to hold, monitor, map, and make fire behavior predictions. Pretty strong, tall order for a first-year program. The secondary priorities in order was, we used to call them MIPFs back then, we call them RX fire now or whatever. But ignition and holding of prescribed fire was their secondary priority, followed by preparation. And that included line construction, fire effects, plot work, burn plan writing, and then last but not least, mechanical hazard fuel reduction. In those days, I advertised that these guys will do anything. They'll do everything and anything you need. These guys will do them. He's really trying to sell a new concept at that time. The structure in '95, you had a term, GS7 module leader, which was needed to be a crew boss qualified. You had a seasonal GS6 assistant at the Type 1 level, and then you had 3 seasonal firefighter Type 2 crew members. The target positions, we were targeting the module leader to be a prescribed fire behavior analyst, the old RXFA position. The assistant was the old prescribed fire specialist, and then crew members were targeted to be prescribed fire monitors. most of these positions, the RXFA, the RXSF, they've all gone away. The only thing that really survives is a FEMO, which would be the equivalent of an RXFM now. That's kind of crosswalked over. Obviously, it would take a modulator more than 1 year. It would take them a few years to get up to the fire behavior analyst level. But that was, and these were tied to that position. So the initial concept was that PS5s would not really become analysts. That was kind of reserved for the 7. I wouldn't say it was super rigid, but that was just the idea. We were kind of making this up as we went along, believe me. This was a real revolutionary concept in '95. These guys were not available to go to wildfires, to fight fire. We warned people when they were hired that you could see multiple columns burning right in your location, and you're going to be digging line, prepping a burn, or doing a thinning project. And we had to play hardball. We realized if we opened that door a crack, the floodgate was going to open, and all they're going to do is go to fires, and the program will fail. We defeated the purpose. In fact, we had to play hardball. I had to play hardball with the Bandolier module that year. Their FMO sent them to a wildfire, local wildfire, and with support from the folks at NIFC, basically if they did it again, we were going to pull funding for the next year. That module would be done and eliminated. That's how serious we took it, that you could not go out and fight fire. Pretty popular, right? So in '95, we came into 1995, we were excited. I was uncertain. I had no idea how this was going to work. Nobody really did. We had a lot of expectations and hope. And the first modulators can attest to, Nate Benson was one of the first modulators. He's a Park Service fire ecologist, works out of NIFC. But I was pretty obsessed with their accomplishments. In every pay period, they had to tell me exactly what they did, something that I could quantify. How much line did you dig? How many chains of line? That type of thing. The idea was I knew that if we weren't transparent, what are we getting for our money? This program was costing money. We needed to know what they were accomplishing. I kind of felt early on, if I can't demonstrate what these guys are doing, or if people ask, what did they do this year, and I don't have any idea, this program's going to fail. So I don't know if this sounds familiar in 2014 or not, but that was what we were dealing with in '95. Why does this program exist? '95, we assisted 28 Park Service units in 9 western states, scattered across. They also helped some interagency partners, Forest Service, ZDF, BLM, and Fish and Wildlife in '95. The modules, the support crew in '95 went to 6 P&Fs between all of them for about a little over 2,000 acres. They helped ignite 46 prescribed burns for almost 14,000 acres. Now they prepped 27.5 miles of line over 42 prescribed burns, and they did a lot of hazard fuel reduction that year, and 147 acres of hazard fuel reduction projects. That was just quantifiable, the stuff the modules did. They also did plot work, and they did a lot of other stuff, but this was the stuff, the meat and potatoes, that I could show at the end of the year in a little first year-end report. This is what we accomplished. This is how much they cost. We can decide whether to keep it or not. So what did we learn? And like any new program, we had to make a lot of adjustments. That year in '95, I went around sometime in the mid-season, and I interviewed every person in that program. I really wanted to hear from the PS5 crew members. And I felt the program needed to be driven from the bottom up, which is probably a little bit at odds with some of the people I worked with here, which was a little more top-down. But coming from the hotshot world, that was, I felt these guys need a voice, and they're the ones that are really going to tell me what what's working, what's not working. So I spent some time with them that year. I ended up spending a lot of time with them in future years, because that was the only way to really figure out what's going on. So first thing we did, we moved the saguaro module to Zion that fall. And the saguaro module, there wasn't a whole lot of work for them in saguaro at that time. And the Zion module was a good location. I could go to Bryce, they could go to the Grand Canyon. Plus there was work in Zion. There was a lot of stuff right around there within a half-day's drive. We found out from the crew members and the module leaders that the first year, they were on the road sometimes 4 to 6 weeks straight. We were just moving them all over the place, trying to get as much work done as possible. And some of them had like places rented, particularly in Tucson, but they were never there. And they're just going, we're just burned out. We need to go home every now and then. So we go, well, maybe we should start adhering to the work rest guidelines at that time, which were 1 day off and 14 days, 2 days off in 21. But we also set a 28-day limit as far as what they could be home, 4 weeks. And they had to be home at least 3 days after that to recharge. The work from the field was that 5 people for a module was just too small. It wasn't enough to get the work done. The consensus was 7, somewhere around there. So we decided to leave Yellowstone at 5 because they were kind of advocating for that. They wanted to stay small. And then we increased the Zion module and the Bandolier module to 7. In Whiskey Town, we tried, let's give them 9, see what happens. They were willing to do that. So let's put the program now at 28 people from 20. And then it was no longer a crew. It was pointed out, well, you guys are not 20 people, you're no longer a crew, so we changed the name to Prescribed Fire Support Modules. And with that, the crew coordinator, myself, I became the program coordinator, but it did not come with a promotion, unfortunately. So now we have a second name, we got a new name. Second year, we got a new name. We created what we call the 5-person core concept. And the idea was you'd always have to minute order, the crew would always have to keep 5 people available as a core, and that would free up 2 people on the 7-person modules for single resource assignments, and up on the Whiskey Town module, then they'd have actually 4 people that could theoretically go out single resource. And part of that was this allowed people to go out on wildfires, to rotate out. It turned out it was a pretty big issue for folks in '95 not to be able to go out and fight fire. We knew it was coming. We knew it wouldn't be popular, and so we kind of eased it up a little bit. And okay, you keep 5 people available, and 2 people can rotate out on wildfires as necessary. In '95, the modules, when they're with the PNF, they were actually ordered on a resource order. For everything else, I just moved them around, independent of the system. And they just traveled, had this with a lot of phone calls, a lot of coordination work, and they would just move around. So there was starting to become pretty confusing in '95. How do we order a module? Do we order as a resource order? We call the coordinator. What do we do to get a module? So this is a big change, a huge change, was to revise the dispatching procedures and actually have them go through a resource order for everything. We had to design some kind of system, which I'll get into later, on how they move around. And then it triggered a lot of presentations that I had to go around and make to coordination centers and work a lot with Nick upstairs on this new resource that the Park Service has. How do we move them around? What works? And a lot of these old slides were all taken from these old presentations that I used back when I would go around putting these, probably around the country, putting these things on. One of the problems in '95 was they were putting a lot of miles on. Their vehicles were constantly breaking down. Sound familiar? So we got funding to order brand new vehicles, a 6-pack for each module. I think they call them the ice cream trucks, or so I don't know, the Whiskey Town module. Oh, there's the ice cream truck. And they would be available for the 1997 season. And that was pretty cool having that, getting that done. The biggest thing, one of the biggest things that was huge was that fall we converted to 8, the 4 modulators and the 2 assistants subject to furlough permanent positions. And that was just a huge step forward for the program. It was a huge victory for me as a coordinator because I've been advocating for that. And it was really cool when the powers that be here in Boise said, yeah, we need to do this, to commit to it. Consolidated the hiring roster. The modulators would start coming to Boise to hire off one seasonal roster, so that they found out when they were first hiring that people play the system, or that way it avoided a lot of duplication of folks taking multiple jobs from 2 different modules, then finally deciding which one they really go to, that kind of thing. Restructured the travel funds. So the module, like Boise initially controlled the travel funds attached to the modules, and then we put those for non-P&F assignments. We gave those to the modules themselves, so they'd be better available for smaller parks. And one of the lesser popular decisions we had to make, because that wasn't only interviewing module members and module leaders, I was talking to the customers, the parks, what's working, what's not working. We had to standardize the per diem to backcountry rate of $15 a day per person. Because basically the modules wanted full per diem. And the parks were saying we can't, they were draining their travel funds, the parks couldn't support it, it's too expensive. And so we agreed that we would just go, they were going to price themselves out of business, so we went to the $15 a day. It was part of the things you have to do so the program can be viable and survive. I started reviewing the training needs to align with these towards the analyst position. We established the interagency detailer program modeled after what the hotshots were doing at the time in the Park Service. So we take 8 detailers a year. In 95 modules, every 4th weekend, we're on 2-hour call. They rotated on 2-hour call. We finally realized after that we dropped that because if it's a P&F, the closest resources are going to go. And then we changed 2-hour call to 8-hour call because we realized P&Fs, the prescribed fires, they're non-emergencies. They're not real fire. You don't get hazard pay. Trees don't fall on them. The fire's always backing the 6-inch plane. So we changed that to 8-hour call back, and that kind of came from the field. Like, why should we be on 2-hour call when we're not really at suppression? That made sense to me. So we entered the 96 season. We had a new logo. We had a new name. We were revamped, recharged. This was a really giddy time for the program. We had new permanent employees. There was a lot of optimism in going into 96. Really heady days then. We have the new locations there at Zion, Bandelier, Yellowstone. The structure now, we had a permanent GS7, we had a permanent GS6, we had 3 crew members at Yellowstone, 5 at Bandelier and Zion, 7 at Whiskeytown, and then we had 1 detailer generally attached to each module. So now you had like anywhere between 6 to 10 people going out. You could get a lot more work done. So we just kind of go over how we dispatched them, because I found this was kind of interesting. Each module had what I was trying to do is like, because the way they would sometimes go back and forth between like Whiskeytown is an example. They'd go back and forth, they'd spend the day up in Lassen, come back down to Whiskeytown. And I thought we'd be driving the GACs just crazy with resource orders just pouring in. So we established this local area concept where they could travel around without a resource order. And they would just be tracked locally by the coordinator. And for an example, for Whiskeytown, they could go to Lassen, Lava Beds, Redwood, and Golden Gate without a resource order and just do prep or burns or whatever they were doing. And then for the other modules, you'd have to look in the operations guide of 96, and they all had their local areas all lined out. I think it was Grand Canyon, Bryce, for Zion, maybe Cedar Breaks, I can't remember exactly. But that way they could just kind of move around there. It was kind of a new concept at that time. The first step to order a module, you had to contact the coordinator. People could go through the system and just place a resource order form. By the time that order got to Nick would usually either walk downstairs and talk to me or call me. I'd walk up and say, which one do you want to send? So you couldn't really bypass the coordinator at that time. Basically, if it was a P&F, the ordering agency got what they wanted if they were available. If it was a prescribed fire, then I'd work to try to schedule it for them and figure out which module made sense to go because they were scattered all over the place. They were ordered as O members, either as technical specialists or prescribed fire monitors, and then they were available when they were prepping, they were available when they were doing hazard fuel work, when they were actually on a fire on the ground, on a prescribed fire, they became unavailable for prescribed natural fire for kind of obvious reasons, I think. For operating, sometimes you'd have scheduling conflicts. In the event that the coordinator and myself would work a lot with the regional FMOs to, like, I would go to them, what's your priority? I got an order for Golden Gate, I got an order for Redwood. What's more important? I can't send them two places at once. And the regional FMO would help make that decision. A lot of times I just say, send them there, you know, and okay, that's what I would do. If there was potential ecosystem health benefits, prescription windows, if all else became, everything else equals first come, first served. Because what I didn't like to do is say, okay, yeah, we can send X and all this, the bandolier module, and then some other priority came up and I had to pull them. So you had to kind of do a lot of negotiation and a lot of coordination to try to maximize the efficiency of them. It gave the coordinator quite a bit of power, but at the same time, I really defaulted to the regional FMOs to help make those. I was not comfortable prioritizing projects within a region. Between regions, then we get the two regional FMOs talking and figure out what was the best for the service at the time. As mentioned, they traveled as a 5-person corps with 2 individuals available for single resources. The caveat, you always had to have a module leader or an assistant with the module with that corps. They needed to have supervision. And then we would combine members on temporary assignments. So sometimes, hey, we need like 10 people, we mix and match and make modules available as long as it didn't compromise the core of a particular module. They were still generally unavailable for suppression assignments in '96, except in the case of an extreme emergency. And we defined what an extreme emergency was, and it was an event in which life is imminently threatened in or immediately adjacent to the module's current location, and of which normal suppression resources are not available. So now if they broke a fire, instead of looking at that column a mile away, now they could actually respond. It kind of made sense. It became real gray. More importantly, they could go out as single resources to help them attain a target position. Some of the people didn't have a lot of suppression experience, and they realized they needed to gain that experience. And then that they needed to keep their qualifications current, which couldn't be done with prescribed fire. So it started making sense that they get out a little bit on fire. So if a P&F, they're on a P&F, they're on a prescribed fire, and it was converted, then there were also rules. They had about 24 hours they could work on a P&F before they had to be released, or until the appropriate suppression resources arrived. So it wasn't like a free pass to do 21-day assignment. And on prescribed burns, they had up to 48 hours, or until resources arrived, and they had to be released. They were starting to get it by this time. And there was a little wiggle room in that policy. But they basically had to keep those sideboards pretty solid, or they would just go out and fight fire. Some of them, that's what they wanted to do, believe me. I talked about, we established the work rest guidelines and the 28-day rule. We had the interagency opportunities. As far as interagency, we opened them up so other agencies could order them in '96. And it was only for a prescribed natural fire or for an actual ignition project. The Park Service had enough burn prep to do. We didn't need to be sending our modules out to prep other agencies' burns. We limited it to only 2 of the 4 modules could go at one time to interagency assignments, because we wanted to keep that resources available for Park Service in particular. We always covered their base salary to make them attractive. We didn't charge their base aid. We still paid travel and per diem for NPS projects, but they were requesting units needed to provide logistics and cover premium pay. We advertised the modules. This is what they came with. We started advertising, hey, they're going to have GPS capability, whatever that is, in 1997. Wasn't really sure what those things were, but they said they needed them, so we started buying them. And then the requesting units needed to provide, obviously, the things you provide for any resource coming in. But we had this all spelled out, so it was pretty clear when Forest Service or BLM wanted to request a module, this is what they needed. This is what the expectation was. So, in '96, they could do all these great things, and we tried to have it where each module came with a crew boss, burn boss, and ignition specialist back then. And that's how we sold it. This is the stuff we're going to take and put onto the GACs, these kind of slides. In '96, they did pretty well. They were out all over the western U.S. The 24 NPS units. We sent the Yellowstone module of the Everglades in '96. That was a big deal getting them to go back east. The interagency support increased again in '96. We had eight different agencies, different units used them there. They went to 6 P&Fs in '95. In '96, they more than doubled that. And they went to 15 P&Fs for almost 50,000 acres. That was a big step forward. Including that was the first time they'd gone to a Forest Service P&F on the Bitterroot National Forest. That was another first. That was a pretty big step forward there. Despite being gone on more P&Fs that year, there was 2.5 times the amount of P&Fs. They still managed to work on 45 burns, so over 10,000 acres. They still managed to prep over 20 miles of line, and they did still manage to get some hazard fuel reduction done. So what did we learn in '96? What things we learned? It was determined from the modules the optimal size. 9 people was clearly too big for Whiskeytown. There was issues with having that many people logistically. We just pared them all down, or pared them down and bumped Yellowstone up. So now we had 28 people in the program, again at 7 people. At this time, we started shifting the target positions away from the prescribed fire analyst type more into prescribed fire operations with emphasis on burn boss and ignition specialists. And then in '96, in September, I went back to Arkansas and Missouri, and I looked at the possible expansion to Buffalo River. We're looking at trying to create a module in Buffalo River. There seemed to be a need there. And so we're looking at possible Midwest expansion at that time. One of the biggest hurdles or issues we had was we basically had about 9 months of burning, and you had 70% of the program were seasonal employees that were constrained by 1039. So we tried, maybe it was one of our goofier ideas, but we tried to midsummer furlough with the Bandolier module in '97. They came on in March, they worked till about June, and then they took 3 pay periods off in the middle of the summer. They came back on, worked till the end of October. Some people loved it, some people hated it. Some people found other work. It was pretty interesting. And one of the biggest things is we identified the need. We got to convert more seasonals to subject furlough because we just can't fit it all in. There's just 1039, it's just not enough time. So, 97 came and went. And by now, after 3 years, the program was pretty well established and successful. The word was definitely out. At this time, the BLM was experimenting. The Fish and Wildlife Service, I think the Briones module in Texas was started, I think, in 96. I remember they were calling me as early as 95. The FMO down there asking about this program. Hey, we want one of those too. And so word was out. I mean, people were starting to emulate the program. And after the first 3 years, the modules had done work on 46 Park Service units, 15 interagency units. We even sent Yellowstone back down to Congaree Swamp in South Carolina and Florida again. And also in 97, I took a trip out in the spring of 97 to the Great Smokies. We looked at the possibility of establishing a module there, and looked at the area and the program, what kind of facilities they have. These are the interagency units supported by the modules after 3 years. By 97, they worked on 9 more P&Fs. I thought that was pretty amazing. In 97, they worked on, the modules helped on 73 prescribed burns for over 17,000 acres in 1997. They still dug 22 miles of line. They also worked on 15 acres. These were pretty impressive stats for this program at this time. People were starting to attract attention. This is working for us. And that was pretty cool. So in late 97, we converted 2 more module C positions at the GS5 level were converted to subject to furlough, and that was a huge success. My goal was to get 5 permanent and 2 seasonal, and we had 4 permanent and 3 seasonal, and I thought that we're doing pretty good. And then we had 2 new 5-person modules would be added in 1998 at Buffalo River and the Great Smokies. So that was, we were looking pretty successful. For what started out as a 20-person crew 3 years before was now 38 people and a coordinator. Growing government, right? And so we finally decided to change our name again. And in 98, we dropped the support and became the Prescribed Fire Modules. And that would certainly be the last name change of the program, right? I think you've had at least 2 changes. And we were fire use modules for a while, and now you're IWFM. But every time you have a change in policy, then the old terminology doesn't make as much sense. So. Here's the locations in 98. Cal had 6 modules, surrounded by a program coordinator moving around. One thing we did agree to with the Midwest was that their prescribed fire, regional prescribed fire person, I think it was Dick, right? That Dick could move them around kind of independently of the coordinator. It started to become a negotiated process, as long as the coordinator was kind of kept in the loop of what was going on. We still had the local areas, but Whiskeytown actually dropped their local area going into 1998. A couple of changes. We lowered the 5-person core to 4 people now to create more single resource opportunities. Since we had 6 modules now, we set up to 4 can be gone now for interagency usage. The modules completely controlled their own travel funds at this time, and we abandoned the midsummer furlough experiment after its 1-year glory was shelved. I don't know if that was ever brought back or not. So in 98, fire policy change started recognizing P&Fs as wildland fires managed for resource benefits. And this is a pretty big issue in the module world when this happened. For this time now, P&Fs, the theory was, well, now since their fire is fire, whether it's not a P&F, it's now a wildfire, they're not prescribed fires anymore, therefore maybe now suppression resources can start going to P&Fs. So we started giving equal prioritization now. P&F was no longer the priority. Prescribed fire was on an equal ground, and the priority would be decided on a case-by-case basis. But the question would be, where do we go from here? This was an evolving program at the time, but it was also starting to get more and more complex. It was starting to get political. It was starting to get political for myself. There was an emerging struggle between Boise and the regions over who should control the modules. And at this time, I was kind of burning out after 3 years, and I needed to get back out in the woods. I had an opportunity to go detail down at Point Reyes as a prescribed fire specialist for a year. And I took that opportunity, and then less than 6 months after I took that detail, my position was eliminated. So they got rid of the coordinator and gave him to the regions. Boise just said, okay, you guys got it, he's gone, do this now, for whatever reason. Other issues in '98, for the previous 4 years, the Park Service has been burning an average of 61,000 acres. By 2001, we're going to need to be burning 4 times that amount. And the demand for the modules was much greater than their supply. So the question is, do we create more of them? And at this time, I said BLM and Fish and Wildlife was already creating them. And then Forest Service has actually come a little bit later in the game. I don't remember when their first modules were created, but as always, like 2014, where's the money going to come from? You know, these were really becoming very complex issues in '98. I'm sure they're still there in 2014. In '98, how are the modules going to fit in? We figured suppression resources are going to become more and more available. So the modules becoming obsolete. Even at that time, we were trying to figure out what's the role of these modules. Are they obsolete? Have they served their purpose? And now the policies change where we don't really need them? Or are they the answer? Are they the panacea that's going to cure our problem? Should they just be available only for prescribed fire? We batted that around. Would nothing really change on the ground? In 1998, we knew suppression resources were going to be still tight because of the emerging wildland-urban interface that was becoming really prevalent across the nation at that time. We're also realizing the modules had great capabilities, but they also had limitations. You had a 7-person module, wasn't going to be able to hold a 10,000-acre prescribed natural fire by themselves. But at the same time, in 1995, the modules, they changed the playing field, man. They changed the dialogue. And by becoming dedicated prescribed fire resources, they really did set the precedent. That much of the interagency community came to embrace after 3 years, that people kind of got it and they wanted to create their own. And I really admired the early module members because a lot of them, especially in '95, '96, they didn't really know what they were getting into. A lot of them left, pretty lucrative suppression jobs to try out this new program, not knowing whether it would succeed or fail. And ultimately, fortunately, it did succeed. So 20 years later, where are the modules going to go in 2015? What's the role of the modules? What's your vision? And I asked, where do you think your program's going to be in 5 years? And I think that's a lot of what you're here perhaps to talk about over the next few days. So, Jason, that's pretty much all I got. I don't know if you want to open it up for discussion or questions or however you want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Anybody have questions for Ben? I'm going to ask yours, did you guys ever Did the modules ever mobilize as a crew, as that original intent? Did they ever come together and form that?
In the '97 Huffer fire, that was the first time they all four got together in Washington National Park. Unfortunately, it got converted because it kind of made a run, but that was a pretty big deal. They were starting to all go in the '95 Mathis fire in Grand Canyon. They were starting to respond to that, but we had to turn them around because it got converted.
Okay.
But that was the one time that I remember when I was there that all four got together was '97 on the Huffer fire.
You know how that? Any feedback on how that went? Were there
Oh,
issues?
It was a reunion.
It was a reunion. Cool.
They were pretty glad to see each other. I mean, the program was pretty cohesive, I felt, at that time for the most part.
Yeah.
I got out as much as I could to work with them, and there was a lot of pretty good strong bonding I felt between the modules at that time. So I think it went pretty well.
Okay.
Questions?
I'm finding that, Dwight from Buffalo River, I'm finding that there's a lot of interpretation about the role of modules between different forests, different parks, different regions, different FMOs. And there does need to be, I feel, a little bit of flexibility between different locations so that different needs are met. At the same time, I think there needs to be stronger standards or a stronger vision, purpose, or mission statement out there for modules. Otherwise, I'm seeing right now the way certain programs are interpreted, they're being pulled into just meeting one's need for one location. In other words, there's a lot of ownership. Possession is 9/10 of the law type of thing going on, and that's concerning me. And I'd like to get that discussion out there. Maybe us as a group can firm up some of those definitions and roles for modules.
At the beginning of the program, purpose was pretty well defined. It kind of had to be. We had to figure out what we were doing. The emphasis was definitely on smaller units, that these tiny little parks or areas that didn't have any resources that they could come in and have fuel reduction work. Whether it was a one-time thinning project that they would go back every 10 years and maintain. And I'll admit now, I mean, I talked with Dan Worthen of the Alaska Regional FMO for Park Service. One of the original module members in '95, we talked at length this summer. And I don't really know, because I'm a user. I was a user at Sequoia Canyon. We used the Saguaro module quite a bit. I think we had Buffalo River there in '03, and we were cycled through. But after a while, I wasn't really sure. We kind of got away from using them because I wasn't really sure what the purpose was. Even myself, like, oh, what are you guys doing now? The program, it's not being critical in any. This is just a user that had a pretty strong connection to the program at its start. Kind of tracked it quite a bit initially after I left the program, but after a while, you get involved with your own stuff. Every now and then we'd use them, but it seemed like they were never available, so we kind of gave up. Or we didn't. Or all sometimes weren't really happy with how they performed. Come in and tell us everything we were doing wrong because they've seen it all. We had that's a lot of kind of interesting attitude when they come, some good, some bad. And so I'm not real clear now what the specific mission. I think you made a good point about flexibility. You could kind of see, hopefully you kind of got a feel how, as we went along, we started out with a pretty rigid focus in '95, and by '98 we broadened that. Become more flexible as we realize what the need was for the different units, for the other agencies. They can't just be an NPS resource. We have to make them available. Really, fire's fire, and what's most important is, of course, health. It's what we're trying to really attains true forest health across the U.S., where agency boundaries shouldn't really matter that.
Ben, let me step in here. History-wise, with the module program, we can actually backtrack 6 years prior to 1994, when we had the Howling Fire. 1988, Yellowstone was the first application that we had the concept, and they were called mobile tactical teams. At the time, the National Park Service had 16 units that had fire staff. So there weren't a lot of resources out there. And so what we literally did at the time that Yellowstone, and I happened to be there, I was the AFMO at the time in charge of fuels. At one time, I had 13 individual fires that we were monitoring. I had staff to monitor 2 in the park. So I had to reach out, and so what my inkling was to go out to those parks and send me, at that time, a mobile tactical team, and they were 2 to 3 people that had monitoring experience, tactical experience, that I could put out and be independent to watch each of these individual fires. And I dropped them out there, and they sat there for 7 to 10 days, and I never went back to catch them. I went, you check in the morning, I expect a noon check-in, and they were there taking weather, doing all the observations on those fires for the entire season until we converted them in July. But we started in April, and so all of a sudden we got into this discussion of how do we do this? It fell off. We had the discussion in the fall of 1988 that this had practicality, but at the same time, the National Park Service in 1989 added 14 more units with staff. So all of a sudden there was more people out there to start doing things. Likewise, in 2000, when we got National Fire Plan money, we went from 28 people, now we have 43 National Park Service units that have staff. So everybody's doing their own thing. There wasn't the need for this mobile workforce that can come in and help the little unit because everybody else had their own staff. So this evolutionary change has really been dictated by the staffing that's gone on there. And we can talk more about also the evolution of the process. Is the eastern modules were created for an entirely different purpose than the western modules. The western modules were dedicated to this whole concept of managed wildfire. The eastern modules they were prescribed fire. And that became the balance, and then you ended up with the problem with the Midwest, and Buffalo got caught in the middle, but really the Black Hills was really caught in the middle because they were both. And so they ended up getting really, drawn in both directions. So they would start really early and ended up, start in January, February, and they would be burning clear into November. And so it almost, and that led to basically conversion to permanent full-time positions. But there is no one vision, and that's the problem, is you got the 2 sides of the process, and we'll talk about it in the policy section, is you got the wildfire, which is the unplanned event that you deal with, and then there's the planned event, and what's your focus, and what is it within the strengths of the unit that you're working on. And in the Midwest region, when I was there, the issue was we managed 98% of our fire was management ignited. I didn't have much of natural ignition. So my modules were all focused on a different direction. Where if you go into the Rocky Mountains area and get west, the majority of their ignition is all unplanned events, so it's all response.
So Dwight, I think you bring up a very good point, and it might vary for agency, but I think it's worth bringing up, and I think in Bill's conversation later this afternoon after lunch, we're going to touch on this again. But it's worth talking about. Maybe we've got separate missions, but I think we can clarify or define that a little bit more, because from my perspective, the last few years, I've been trying to figure out what it is that we can provide, but it's all based on flexibility, that early flexibility that when they created this program, that they had these 4 or 5 people that had fairly diverse and pretty good experience that could go off and do a variety of different things. And so they weren't just a suppression crew, or they weren't just a monitoring crew. We can do those things. Those are tools, but it's rooted in the flexibility. What we do now is just being very flexible, whether it's operations, planning, monitoring. So it's just all these things. I've struggled to define it too. I've gone to the command and general staff meetings in the Southwest. There's been times where I've struggled to define what it is we do. So if we can maybe as a group just start to clarify that a little bit, never all gonna be the same, but we can find out a little bit, it's worth talking about.
To give you an example, when we hired the first 4 modules, there was a definitive purpose between the module leader and the assistant. One had to be operationally qualified and the other had to be a fire ecology person. And that was intentional. And so there was immediately that balance, and at the same time, conflict is, are we here for the ecological side or are we here for the operational side? And as Ben talked about, those first discussions for, those guys who were literally, a lot of them were, squad leaders, assistant superintendents, squad bosses coming out of hotshot crews, and we put them in a module program